Hi friends, it's Alexa from Alexa Loves Books, and today I am bringing you my March wrap-up. The very first book that I read last month was Salt to the Sea by Ruta Sepetys. This one is about 4 different teenagers who are basically struggling to survive World War II and all the mayhem and destruction that it's caused in the various countries in Europe. And these 4 teenagers are specifically involved with the Wilhelm Gustloff, a ship that is basically supposed to transport refugees. And that ship actually ended up sinking in one of the greatest, actually the greatest maritime tragedy. It happened during World War II, and it's one of those events that I have never heard of before, so I am so happy that this book educated me on that point. I really liked Salt to the Sea, even though it actually was a book that wasn't structured in a way that I read very often, which is the 4 points of view and very short chapters. So we were constantly jumping from one character to another. I really like that it gave us a very wide perspective on the entire situation, and it also gave us different cultural perspectives on it. It's a very strong historical fiction novel, and I really feel like this is one of those books that people should read, and they'll come away with the knowledge of this great tragedy and a deeper understanding of that particular time period and how horrifying it is. The next novel that I read in March was Out of Frame by Megan Erickson, and that is the 3rd novel in her In Focus series, and these are romances. And I really enjoyed it. It is so cute. The premise is basically that main character Quinn is on a spring break cruise with his best friend, and they're on a cruise that involves their favorite reality TV show. So all the stars of the TV show are on the ship too. And there's one of them in particular that Quinn is very interested in, and it's just adorable because obviously a romance happened. It's so adorable, but it's also really substantial. And I loved it. It was so cute. I read it so quick, and I'm super excited for the next one as well in this series. If you guys have yet to check out this series and you guys are, looking for a new contemporary romance to read, then I highly recommend it, as well as all of Megan Erickson's other books, which I also really enjoyed. The 3rd book I read this month is probably one of the novels that I'm most disappointed in, and that is Longbow Girl by Linda Davies. It's basically about a girl named Mary Owen, and she is trying to find a way to help her parents save their land and their farm. She's also best friends with her neighbor James, whose family happens to be at odds with hers, and that's like a long time rivalry. Mary discovers that there is a pathway to the past and that she can get what she needs to save her family's legacy, but at the same time she also has to help out her family in the past. And it's pretty interesting. I really like the Welsh lore, and I love the idea of a longbow girl. Mary is a pretty strong heroine, and I really like that. The writing style just didn't click for me, and I also really felt like it was kind of not as developed as I would have liked. The next novel I read is actually a dystopian novel, and I haven't read one in a while, so I think that's part of the reason why I was really surprisingly impressed by this one. Flood. This is the first in I think it's a duology, and I think it's quite impressive. It's about a girl named Celestine North, and she's basically this society's definition of perfect. She follows all the rules, she never steps out of line, until one day when a situation that has a logical solution in her head turns out to have a solution that's actually against the law. And she gets arrested, and all of the things she's known about rules and the law and the society are put into question. I really like that Ahern was able to weave in these subtle themes of ethics and morality into the story. It's very interesting to me. And I also kind of just like how simple the dystopian society is. There's really a line between good and bad. It's a fairly typical dystopian story because there's obviously going to be a rebellion, and the main character is stuck in this place where she has to decide what she thinks is right. And I did like it. I didn't love it, but I really liked it. I also finally got around to reading Rebel of the Sands by Alwyn Hamilton, and I was so thoroughly entertained by this book. I love the combination of Western and Middle Eastern it's just done so well, and it's really compelling. Like, the pacing is great. I think like all the details in the story were really great too, and I really like main character Amani, who's such a badass. This is basically about a girl named Amani who is a sharpshooter, a really good one, and she's determined to find a way out of her hometown of Dustwalk, and she actually goes to compete in a sharpshooting competition, only that kind of blows up in her face. A lot of things blow up in her face, and she suddenly finds herself having to leave town with a stranger she met at the sharpshooting competition named Jin. And from there, an adventure ensues, and it basically involves them going across the desert, getting into shenanigans, discovering the rebellion in the desert, and it's just a lot. I know it sounds like a really crazy mix of plot things, but it all really came together seamlessly, and I really enjoyed it. I read a middle grade novel this month, and it's Behind the Canvas by Alexander Vance. Claudia loves art, and she's obsessed with going to museums and art history and all of that stuff. And one day she encounters a Dutch boy named Pim who is stuck behind a painting. She finds out that there's a whole world behind the canvas, and in order to help her friend Pim escape, she has to go behind the canvas and find the witch who cursed him and grab her staff, source of power, and get rid of it. I really liked how the author wove actual art and actual art history facts into this story. I thought the world behind the canvas was very imaginative, and I quite like Claudia as a heroine. However, I will say that the writing, as I said earlier, is kind of weird at the beginning, and the setup is a little strange, but once it clicks, it clicks. It's a very entertaining novel. Two Summers by Amy Friedman, and this is the story of a girl named Summer and the 2 summers she experiences when she makes one choice. At the very beginning of the book, Summer is about to board a plane, and in the first timeline she boards the plane, visits her father in France, and in the second timeline she stays in New York because she doesn't get on the plane. I really liked that the author was able to tell 2 different stories depending on where the character was, but she also integrated elements that were parallel with both. The beginning, the setup part was a little bit like clunky for me, but eventually it kind of smoothed itself out. In general, it was more about the main character's growth and what she learns about herself and her relationships with her family and her friends over the course of the summer. It also got a pretty great wrap-up at the end, and I really like that as well. The next book I read is one that I was super excited to get early, and that is The Beast by J.R. Ward. It is another novel in her Black Dagger Brotherhood series, which is probably the only urban fantasy series that I consistently keep up with. It is so good. This is a story that focuses on Rage and Mary, who are the couple in the second book of the series. They're basically both struggling with different things. I will not say much more because obviously spoilers, but it's so good. I was so surprised by how good it was. I was getting so emotional reading it. Ward just has a way of writing these characters to, like, in a way that they come to life so well and they feel like family to me, and I adore them so much. I freaking love The Beast. I read my first Cat Winters book this month, and it is In the Shadow of Blackbirds. This is the story of a girl named Mary Shelley Black, and her father sends her to live with her aunt, and while she's living with her aunt, she hopes to reconnect with the boy that she was childhood friends with and she's fallen in love with, but he died during the war overseas. But his ghost appears to Mary when her photograph is taken. It's spirit photography, which is like they take a picture and the spirit appears in the picture. And his spirit apparently appears in the picture, and it sets Mary off on this adventure where she has to figure out what he wants because she really believes that he has appeared to her for a reason. I was just really caught up with Mary as she tried to figure things out, and I actually guessed wrong about how it was going to conclude. I mean, I was close, but I guessed wrong. I really liked Mary as a main character because she was pretty strong. I also really just liked the mystery part of the story because I thought it was really exciting, and Cat Winters writes really, really well. After reading my first Cat Winters novel, what did I do? I ended up reading my next Cat Winters read, and it is The Uninvited. This is about a girl named Ivy who sees the ghost of her loved ones when someone in her community or someone close to her is about to die or has died. Ivy actually sees the ghost of her grandmother, I believe, when her father and her brother return home after killing a man. And this basically is the story of Ivy leaving home, making a life for herself, trying to figure out how she feels about the situation with her family and in this war, and also about all the people getting sick in her community with influenza. Once again, Kat Winters does an incredible job with the setting. I was completely there when I was reading the story, but I also like that this one is very character focused, and it really was all about Ivy's personal journey, and I really like that. It's also very unexpected for me, honestly, and I really like that too. The next book I read is a fantasy novel, and that is Queen of Hearts by Colleen Oakes. This is a story inspired by Alice in Wonderland, in case you couldn't guess, and it's actually the story of the Queen of Hearts before she became the Queen of Hearts. So it's basically a teenage version of her, and she is living under the thumb of her father. Everything as she knows it changes when her father brings home a daughter he had outside of his marriage, and he actually acknowledges her, and that changes the dynamic of the court. This novel tackled Dinah's discoveries about her kingdom and how the court works and how her father is ruling and what he plans to do. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how much I love the Wonderland that Oakes describes in her novel, because it's amazing. It's got the elements of the Wonderland that we all are kind of familiar with from the movies or the books, but she just completely made it her own, and I was so fascinated by the world that I kept wanting more of it. The characters were pretty decent. I liked Dinah a lot. I was rooting for her, even though I know she's going to turn into the Queen of Hearts. And I thought the character relationship she had, particularly to her brother, to her tutor, and to her childhood friend slash the guy she's in love with, were really interesting. But I didn't really feel like any of the other characters were as well developed as she was. I think the plot is pretty straightforward and pretty compelling, and I just tore through this novel, so that's pretty good, I'd say. The thing is, I don't know how invested I got in the story just because I couldn't personally connect with the characters, which is always something I want in my books. So I don't even know if I'll be continuing the series. So it was good, but it's not a novel that I'm extremely passionate about. I ended up reading pretty early One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid, who is one of my favorite adult contemporary fiction writers. And oh my goodness, you guys, once again, she has written a novel that is completely stunning. One True Loves is the story of a girl named Emma. She ends up marrying her high school sweetheart Jesse. They move away from home, they make a life for themselves, and they're both really into travel, so that's what their careers are centered around. But on their very first anniversary, Jesse is away for work, and he disappears when his helicopter goes down above the ocean. And of course, Emma has to deal with the aftermath of that, and there's like a moment of very, very intense grief for her in her life. So she ends up making big changes. She moves back home, starts working at her family's bookstore, and then she meets one of her old friends, Sam, and she realizes she has a second chance at love. What's the catch? Well, right when she's about to marry Sam, she hears that Jesse has been rescued and he's back in her life again. And so Emma is forced to ask herself the question of what it means to truly love someone, if it's possible to love more than one person, and oh my gosh, it's again a very complicated situation, but Reid handles it so well. There's such a lightness to her writing, but at the same time she has so many deep and thoughtful themes integrated into her work. I love the characters, which is not surprising because I genuinely think Reid knows how to write people who read like real people. Like I could be reading about a friend of a friend or my friend, and it's just incredible. I always appreciate that. And I just really enjoyed it. The Incredible Adventures of Cinnamon Girl by Melissa Keel. This is the second novel I've read by this author, and once again, I really enjoyed it. It is a light contemporary YA novel about a girl named Alba who lives in Eden Valley and is facing a time of change after she's finished with high school and should be going off to university. She's not quite sure what she wants. At the moment, she's just trying to hold on to everything familiar and dear to her. Of course, can't stay that way because the people around her have their own plans, and not only do they have their own plans, but some YouTube prophet has decided to announce that their home, Eden Valley, the area where they live, is going to be the safe spot after the apocalypse happens. So people start flooding in, as you can imagine, and it just changes everything. What I liked about this novel is, even with all the craziness ensuing, it's also just a simple, straightforward story of a girl coming to terms with all the things that are changing in her life. So great. I really like the characters as well. Alba is such a great main character. She's creative and she's funny and she's strong, and I loved her little group of friends and even her family, and I really enjoyed it. I read When We Collided by Emery Lord. I freaking love this book. It's about a girl named Vivi and a boy named Jonah. They meet during a summer in a small coastal town in California, and their lives basically are changed after they meet each other, and in lots of different ways. Vivi has her own things that she's trying to deal with, and she's determined to have like an ideal summer, a happy summer, summer freedom. Jonah, on the other hand, is dealing with the responsibility of juggling all the household management with his older siblings and taking care of the younger ones because their mom is kind of out of it because she's depressed after their father died. I really love Emery's ability to write characters that I feel like I could be friends with, and that's how I felt about Vivi and Jonah. They were both just so vibrant and vivid and wonderful, and I really fell in love with them. I really enjoyed how she let the plot unfold as it would, and we learned more about these characters through their relationships with each other and with other characters as well. It's just one of those novels where you can't stop reading it once you start because you want to know if these characters are going to end up okay, and I adored it so much. I also read Winkpapi Midnight by April Genevieve Tucholk, and this is a very odd book, you guys. It reads sort of like a fairy tale, which is something my friend Lily of Lily's Reflection said. It's basically about these three characters who live in the same town, Poppy, Wink, and Midnight. And you can't really tell which one of them is the good character, which one is the bad character. If you read it and you kind of don't gel with the writing style right away, then it's not for you. But I thought it was so odd in a way that was almost magical. I liked how briefly written each perspective is, and that it switches a lot, and we kind of get all the pieces of the story and have to put it together ourselves. I also read A Fierce and Subtle Poison by Samantha Mabry, and it is about a boy named Lucas who summers with his father in Puerto Rico, and it gets into a relationship with one of the local girls, but that girl turns out missing. The only way he can figure out what's going on is with the help of a girl who lives in the house that everyone says is cursed. I really found this one to be beautifully written. The writing was so easy to read, it flowed really well, it had like a nice steady cadence to it. I also really like that it was set in Puerto Rico because I don't think I've read a book set in Puerto Rico before. I wasn't overly fond of the main character. I understood where he was coming from, but he wasn't really a character I could root for or really like. I did like the girl main character, however. She's really fascinating. I didn't quite know what to expect going into this, like how the plot would play out, but I was pleasantly surprised because it actually ends up being really satisfying, especially when you hit the conclusion. So yeah, I'd say I enjoyed it overall, but I will say I don't think it's for everyone. I also read The Square Root of Summer by Harriet Ruder Hapgood. This is a novel about a girl named Gotti who is experiencing some crazy time-space phenomena where she keeps getting thrown back into her past from her present. And I like that this one is a combination of science when it comes to time and space, but it's also just the story of a girl trying to deal with her grief, with growing up, and with romance and first love and friendship and all of that. I think it's such an interesting combination. I also really like Gotti as a character. She has this really unique way of looking at the world. I also really like that she's also flawed and makes mistakes and that she eventually learns from them. Plus, there's like this really charming bookshop, the village sounds so cute, and like the secondary characters are pretty adorable. I also managed to reread one book this month, and that is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets by J.K. Rowling. I still really enjoyed it. I thought Harry was still sassy as ever, and I really liked that. I laughed a lot while I was reading this one for some reason. I feel like because there's so many shenanigans going on, and it was really entertaining. And I read Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. It's basically about a boy named Fitz who is the bastard of the Crown Prince, and how he is forced to live in the palace and make a life for himself, you know, in spite of what his birth has left as a legacy for him. I think it's really slow at the start. There's a lot of build-up, there's a lot of setup for the world and the character, especially Fitz. I didn't mind it so much because I like getting to know my characters. I really like getting to know Fitz, and it made me feel really invested in his future, but I thought it was a shame that he was the only character that kind of felt well developed. The others were sort of just, I could give them one characteristic and that was it. I also ended up liking the first actual adventure he goes on, which is towards the end of the book. So it's kind of a shame that that pacing didn't happen even earlier on in it. But yes, I ended up really intrigued, and I'm definitely gonna keep going and see what happens to Fitz in the rest of the books. And the last book that I read this month is Masks and Shadows by Stephanie Burgess, and this one is set in 1779 during the Habsburg Empire. It's about a girl named Charlotte von Steinbeck, who is a recently widowed baroness come to visit her sister at the Esterhazy, I hope I'm pronouncing all of this right, palace. Her sister actually is the mistress of the prince that owns the palace, so that's a little awkward. Another significant figure in the story is Carlo Morelli, who is the most famous musico / castrato in Europe at that time, and he is also a guest at the palace. And these two meet, and they also have to navigate the court intrigue, the power plays, the secrets, and the romance at the palace. It was a pretty compelling story, and I was very interested to see how it was going to end. I could guess at some of it, but I was still a little surprised by a few things, so that was nice. I didn't particularly find myself attached to any of these characters, which was a shame because there was so much potential. I think for me, this is one of those books where I could see what the writer was trying to do, and I think she managed to accomplish it, but she could have pushed it more. There was definitely potential for it to be one of the most compelling, most beautiful fantasies I've read in a while, and it just wasn't that for me. And there you have it, guys. That was my March wrap-up. If you are interested in reading any of these books, I would love to hear why down below, and if you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you think. And all of my links to social media, Twitter, Snapchat, Tumblr, Facebook, everything will be down below, and I will see you guys soon for another video. Bye!